the side here just to check that we're okay. And I think, yeah, it already, okay, I think we're live on X already. Don't see YouTube going live yet. Ah, there we go. There's our notification. All right. So let's begin here and turn off my volume. Interrupted. But all right. So finally, thanks for your patience. We're about 24 minutes behind, but we're all set up here for the live stream. So thank you for joining us on this special occasion. I'm usually just coding on my own thing, but today we have a special guest with us, Allard, the CTO of AxonIQ, responsible for the very successful Axon framework. So if you are working on event sourcing solution, especially I think in the JVM stack, you would definitely have heard of Axon, right, Allard?
I hope so. Yeah.
So maybe we can just do a quick intro. It's for people that don't know who you are. Maybe you can give kind of a background of like how you started in this, what got you excited about computers, and then what got you excited about event sourcing and all the other things.
Ooh, you want to go that far back?
You know, as long as it's short, and we want to get into the code, right?
I'll try to keep it short. We'll do a fast forward
I'm just kidding.
few
You can
times
go as long
then.
as you want. It's your time.
So yeah, so my name is Allard Buijze. Last name is quite difficult. It's a very typical Dutch last name, so don't worry about pronouncing it. Anything works. And then my passion of computers started when I was 6 years old. That's quite a long time ago, to be honest. But my parents got a Commodore 64 because
Just like
they said, "Hey, computers are going to be big, right? They're going to be important, and they're going to enter the household." So my father's employer wanted everybody to be able to get access to a computer at home, so that their employees could get familiar with them. Unfortunately, for my father, I was in between him and the Commodore 64 the whole time. And they bought these little books where Ghost explained how computers worked and how to write programs. And there were little programs. And you can imagine when you're 6, you can barely read and write. But yeah, you can copy characters, right? So I just started to copy characters. And then you press run, enter, or load. I can't remember the exact command of the Commodore 64. And yeah, cool stuff happens, right? And then you modify it a little bit, and something else happens, and that just inspired me a lot. That intrigued me. So fast forward, I went to university, and I thought, I want to be an aircraft engineer, aerospace engineer. So I went on aerospace engineering, and on the side, I still did programming, and then I realized planes are nice, but it's not. I don't live for those things. I live for this computer. So I switched to another university and went for a computer science degree. And I just whizzed through that. It was so, I mean, everything that I did was full of motivation. And yeah, I joined a consultancy firm. Through that, I had some connections in the Spring team, the Spring framework, well known in the JVM space, but probably also beyond. And through those connections, I found the company from which SpringSource in Europe originated, and I joined those because I was not really a product person, which in hindsight is quite funny if you look at what I do now. But I wanted to do consultancy. I wanted to do different projects, and that was really cool because we did really cool projects, not huge projects, but technically quite challenging. And I was actually quite frustrated with those projects, not because they were not successful, but because I felt that the complexity of the solution was higher than the complexity of the problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
And and everybody was okay with it, right? But for me, it just didn't feel right. I mean, how can a solution be more complex than the problem?
Yes.
It just didn't compute in my brain. So I thought there has to be something. I'm missing something. So I started to explore, and I was already a little bit into DDD. I was trying to wrestle my way through the blue book, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think everybody who's tried
Mm-hmm. We've
knows that
yeah,
feeling that
we've been
oh,
there. Yeah.
it's. I made it to the end. I had to do it again because I missed half of it on the way. But and I thought, hey, there's something to it. It's quite interesting. I even attended the training with Eric Evans.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, I followed it in New York, and he was quite amazed. Why did two people from the Netherlands join a training in New York?
Yeah.
And we said, well, it was cheaper because they had a discount, and it was actually cheaper to fly to New York and do the training there than to
Yeah.
just take it closer to home.
Yeah, people don't realize
But
how in demand some of these things are. We had people fly in from Europe to Vancouver for a conference last year. So it's yeah,
yes,
that's
exactly.
what
I
we're
mean, if
doing
you
is
want to
really
get
needed,
true
right?
knowledge,
Yeah.
if you want to get true knowledge, you
Yeah.
take the flight.
Yeah,
You take it for
exactly.
granted.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. So, and that was really, really cool. So I started to do projects more with DDD and mindset, and it really helped up to a certain point.
Yeah.
And then again, that complexity started to spike again, and I thought, this is it's 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 not the whole thing. There's
Yeah,
something else.
you feel like you still haven't gotten to where you think you can go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're on the way there,
Yeah.
right? And then there was this guy, let's call him Greg,
Yeah.
who started to talk about, hey, there's this DDD is nice, but there's not one model. You should have multiple models, and I think
Yeah.
it was called distributed domain-driven design in the beginning,
Yeah, yeah,
in the
yeah.
very
And
early days.
well,
And
so the idea was that you could, because it's all the letter D for the acronym, you could put the word distributed at any point to make it do what you want it to do.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
like build your own acronym at that point.
Yeah. And so I started to play around with that, and I thought, hey, this is a nice concept. And I went to my boss and I said, I want to investigate this. I want to spend some time researching how this can improve the way we build software. And this was in 2008, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and he said, "Yeah, that sounds good. Let's go for it. The first couple of weeks, you get it 1 day a week to spend time on this research, um, but there's one condition, and that condition is that you give a presentation about it when you have a result." So I said, "Oh, great,
Hmm.
I don't mind." So I started to do a presentation after a couple of weeks, and that was yeah, people were intrigued, and it was interesting, and people thought, "Hey, we want to know more." So I got more time and spent more time also privately. Started to invest time in just building. I was actually working on an e-commerce project, and then I thought, let me build a shadow version of this, minimized, right? Not with all the bells and whistles, but using this different paradigm.
Yep.
I noticed that after a couple of weeks of development, I had written 0 lines of code, literally, that had anything to do with the use case.
Yeah.
And I figured, if that's the case, then anybody who builds anything will need to build this first.
Yeah.
So why don't I put this in a little library and we'll see where it ends, right?
Yeah. And here we are.
And here we are 17 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think then the name Axon started in 2010. So I think
Yeah.
I spent more or less a year to do just explore and build different things. And yeah, it was great fun. And it was in 2010 where I got an email from a company in France. And the architect said, we're going to go into production with your framework.
Hmm.
We have a few questions before we go live in like a few weeks. I'm like, whoa, hold on, whoa, wait.
Yeah.
This is not a framework, right? This is a library of stuff
Yeah.
that I found useful for my pet projects.
Yeah.
Don't do this. But what are you building?
Yeah.
They said, well, it's an application that is used by surgeon to track the tools they use during
Oh
surgery.
my God. Yeah.
Okay,
No
sounds like
bugs,
a great
please.
first use case.
We don't want to lose any patients on the
Yeah,
table.
exactly. So as far as I know, nobody died because of a bug in the framework,
Yeah.
but that gave me the confidence to start using it myself in
Yeah.
some much less important projects later on.
Yeah.
And
I
that
mean,
was in 2010. So
I think we make connections about how useful things are later. I mean, I certainly because of this experimental nature that event sourcing was in, you kind of say you're just playing, and when it actually shows that it's a more responsible way to treat information, that this is the other way around. You have to kind of justify the existing ways of working to not improving to event sourcing. So we're really, the imposter syndrome for a whole community existed for quite a long time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. You were one of the weird
Yeah.
people, right? It was
Yeah.
interesting, but more of interesting, like, yeah, it sounds like fun.
Yeah. But when
But
you
let
look
me
at it
not
from
do
a
this in
common
a
sense
proper way.
perspective now, it seems so backwards because, when I say by default, I want to not throw away information. I mean, that makes sense to everyone. Yeah, of course. Why would you throw that information? That's really useful for a company, for your project, for your system, right? Why would you throw stuff deliberately into the trash can? And when you say
Yeah.
it like that, it makes sense. But
And you tell people, and they still make you feel like you need to defend yourself
I
for not
know.
throwing it away. Well
But
done.
so okay,
This is
so
the
let's
world
say that
upside down.
let's say they agree. They say, all right, you're right. We shouldn't throw away information by default. So let's make a bunch of history tables so that anytime we
Oh
change
my
any of these
God.
tables, come on, Allard, this is easy. I mean, we have documentation on how to make history
Yes.
tables.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been there. I've
Yes,
done my history
exactly.
tables.
This is the whole
It
thing
was last
about
century.
core integrity to be put in as an afterthought never works, right? So we have excellent logging. Our code is commented well. I mean, we have all of these things that we've done in the industry
Yeah.
where it's really just, it's important, but not important enough. I can
It's
give
like
you
there's
lip
duct tape
service
all
to
over the
it,
place.
but
And
you can't depend on it, right? So when can you depend
exactly.
on when you say that you're going to have no loss of information? I forgot to write to the
What I've
history table. Sorry.
what I've noticed is that, and of course I started event sourcing as an experimental project, and just to figure out, would this be a way to build software in a different way, and on the way I found out that it addresses so many of the common problems we have, and we all find little patch solutions for it. There's duct tape all over those code
Yep.
bases. And now we have a way to fundamentally address those.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those little tools that we use to solve problem X, problem Y, problem Z, whatever, they can all just disappear. We don't need those anymore because those are self-inflicted problems.
Yeah. Yep.
But people are afraid to throw away what they have. I had a discussion last week with someone about the human psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Is people prefer to hit roadblocks that they know rather than take a road around those roadblocks that they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you're
Fear
going
of
to
the
hit,
unknown.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Baby duck
exactly.
syndrome, all sorts of things that we can say from the industry where there's really a risk aversion, even though the sad thing is that people don't explore the other side to actually have the risk properly quantified. And so our work, I think, is important to always expose this so it becomes more common knowledge, and that people understand that, okay, with event sourcing, you probably don't want to share, read models too much. You want to have separate custom build things. You probably don't want to pollute your events with extra information that would otherwise be found in a green box. Some of these things are just different ways of getting the same thing done. But I think, part of this journey, we've been talking about this on the podcast, is people just bring the best practices from the old way of working. And it's like, even though you had a horse and buggy and you know how to whip the horse really well, that's not going to help you drive a car,
No.
because you're moving to the car now.
Yeah, exactly. I use that analogy quite a lot. I mean, there's a lot of analogies we can make. There's so many examples of disruptive technologies where people had to get used in, and I've heard stories. I think in the UK, when the car was introduced, you would need a person to walk in front of the car, waving a red flag to let people know that an automated horse would arrive.
Yes.
Well, why was the adoption of the car not a big thing in the UK? Well, first of all, you had to afford the car, then you had to afford a person, and you couldn't drive very fast because you couldn't bypass the person
What's the
in front of
point?
the car.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
sounds like that's event sourcing these days. It's like, yeah, you need to give us the schema, and you have to have unit tests that always pass, because you're going to be maintaining code. That means you're going to be revisiting that. Like we don't we don't go back and change code on slices that already work rarely, like ever. And usually we'd rather replace them wholesale. So now how useful is your unit test? It was really there to provide you the guidance, the specification, and then it's entirely useless. It's kind of like the holy grail of what TDD wants. So that you're not using it for testing, but for design. So, but then again, just like with event storming, throw away the paper after your event storming day. It's just not useful anymore after. The actual activity of interacting with people was the value. Yeah. And here we have testing as the design activity. So it's back to the car thing. I also saw fake horses on the front of cars. And so that I think it was either so it wouldn't spook the horses that were still on the roads, or it might have been some bylaw that you had to fit some sort of silhouette. It still had to look like a horse. I don't know what it was, but I think it might have been just so the other horses don't get spooked.
You can use event sourcing as long as you use create updates and
that's right. Yes, right? You can't. And I remember tiptoeing around DBAs and all that, right? Like, we're just doing a regular application and trying to sneak in. How many of us have tried had to sneak in event sourcing as shadow ops, trying to hide behind all these things, right? So we have, can't use a framework like Axon. You got to use a table that's called event. So better not use the word event, because that might set someone off that you're doing event sourcing. So
data changes.
It had to all be. So I was so tired of that, and so I think we lived kind of parallel lives. I think when was the company that said, the French company said we're going to use this in production? What do you remember?
2010.
2010. Okay, yeah. So quite a while ago. Yeah.
They were pretty early in the game.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, the company was acquired by a very large pharmaceutical firm from the US, and they basically killed the product. They said we're going to push our own products. One of the two architects went to completely a different kind of area, and the other architect actually met her once completely. Well, for me, by accident. I just did a meetup in Denver, and suddenly this person with speaking English with a French accent came to me and said, "Yeah, we've been talking, and I really am sure I haven't met you before."
Yeah.
And then suddenly it struck me like, no, this was 7 years ago. We met online talking about the first project. So you just bump into the person who is actually the first one to bring your framework to production.
Yeah, I didn't have someone bring my own, but I always had this idea that event sourcing shouldn't be hard. We have this very simple interface that you use over and over again, getting events, projecting from events. That's the only thing you're doing. So to me, it said, if I can't make this myself, then I failed. So my framework was always a library like you started, where I had, some few basic features there, maybe blob storage, kind of, not blob storage, but chunk files, appending serialized JSON or XML at the time, because I did mine in 2009, and JSON wasn't that popular yet, especially in the .NET space. That was like XML serialization. So I had XML serialized events that were going into chunk files. And I remember it was actually what really set me off that this is the only way I want to work, is because I was able to get my own event sourcing library done in like a single page of C# code. I was like, this is simple. Like if I can get going on this, and then of course, being able to answer the scalability questions that, okay, if I need to do this, I know that I'll be able to build this extra piece of infrastructure. But the beautiful thing is that I don't have to change my business logic one iota. Like that was the key, is that this thing just keeps working, right? It's like it's the same rule, right? And then getting into like the functional kind of paradigm of programming, that mindset that, wow, these things work like mathematical functions, that for the same input I'm getting the same output all the time. Like, holy smokes, that's like the holy grail for like unit testing and so many other things. I slowly saw that with event sourcing, like the top 100 problems in programming just went away. They were not problems anymore. So I'm like, okay, if we can just play in an area where those problems simply don't exist, that's way better than actually solving those problems. Which was like, that was like the thing that was going on in my head with event sourcing the whole time, is that like, I don't have to worry about this. I used to have to worry about huge schema migrations, going from schema A to schema B when we're going from this version to this version. And those are nightmares. Holy crap. I mean, I remember companies getting totally stuck on it. Here, we're just taking each new version of an event, etc., and migrating that as you're getting those new versions to what it should be. There is no build-up for a huge migration, right? All these tools that we had for all these schema things. I forget the
flyways.
What were some of those tools that were used? I don't even remember anymore. I'm happy that I don't have to remember that anymore. None of our clients ever use that. So anyway,
I remember the ORM hell, right? When
that
the
too.
Object relational mapping. How do you map an object structure to a proper relational database? And it was actually
we lynched
a really
ORM
cool
prematurely. I think we lynched ORM a little prematurely. I think ORM kind of exacerbated the single model problem. Because I can still see that I could use an ORM if I'm using multiple models, like for multiple read models. If I have a very small, tiny graph for each green box, I kind of don't care that there's an ORM that gives me that. It's not going to... But I think the way that people wanted to use ORMs to really have this noun verb kind of overlay into the persistence and especially in one model that's going to rule all your business rules, that's where it kind of fell apart. You're just asking way too much, right? And
in most organizations, that model would always be behind. So before I joined before I started AxonIQ, I actually spent a lot of time being a troubleshooter for projects in trouble.
Yeah.
And I always enjoyed just walking around the office of my customer and just looking around at the various desks. And there would always be one desk, usually in the corner somewhere, with a beautiful diagram behind it. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And it was typically the canonical domain model.
Yeah.
And I would always just go there and just look at it. Not even read what's on it. It was not important. You can't read it anyway. Because that just looking at it triggers the owner of that document to start a conversation. And okay, that's the architect. Right?
Yeah. Why is this guy looking at my stuff? I don't know him. He's got a problem with what I did?
Exactly. And I always found that model was then presented in a way where the developers felt we need to implement this. And that's where hell starts.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, one of the...
Let's talk about fun stuff.
Yeah, let's get into some code. So what does this mean? Like, maybe I'll show you what I did, and then you can tell me how we can start using this in Axon, and like how, because I really want to get going. I know, Martin, of course, that wrote this book here, right? So
I can
this is
recommend that one.
This is an amazing book, and it's all based on Axon examples, right? So I feel like I have to kind of catch up to him, kind of play in the JVM world for a bit here, because I started off all the event sourcing stuff mostly in the .NET space, and then when I started my company, we went to we couldn't just be .NET. So what is the most popular thing out there? Well, it's JavaScript, it's Node, it's Postgres, it's React, or whatever the flavor of the front end is at the time. And that's kind of where we had to go. We still brought in Event Store DB because we're in the .NET space. So that's, we were talking before we started going live here about this affinity to, like, you're in the JVM stack. So like Axon, and naturally people that are in the JVM stack go to Axon, and .NET has the Event Store people that have built that in C# from the very beginning. So we have this kind of like these two worlds. But I'm kind of like forced myself in the middle, and the last thing that's keeping me back in the .NET thing is Event Store DB, or now it's called Current. And I need to play on both sides. I need to understand, because we have a common interface to how we deal with events and event sourcing. And some of the things we want to get into actually is like the next step. So remember how you said that I'm doing DDD, but I reached like a limit, like I'm still getting problems. I know there's more, and you discovered event sourcing. I think now both of us have found that the same thing happened with event sourcing. And we still dragged in some of the stuff with aggregates, right? And so we really want to talk about the dynamic consistency boundary, right? Not context boundary. DCB means dynamic consistency boundary, which, for those that are familiar with a domain-driven design, is the concept of not relying on the aggregate alone. So you can start to say that I can dynamically choose what my transactions are. And I think I had this discussion on the podcast with Martin, where we, with that initial aggregate boundary is really important when we're writing the event. or one type of event, or processing one command. But the boundary is different when you choose another command. A simple example of that is like, I want to cancel an order, and my business rule is really simple. I don't care what state the order is in. I don't care what line items are in there. So why should I look at all the events or adding things to that order, paying for it or not, or setting the shipping address, all that? If I get a command that says cancel the order, I don't care. My context my transaction boundary, my context, my consistency boundary, that stuff changes for this thing. I don't need to hydrate the entire thing to cancel it, right? That's the first clue that I got, and we started talking about this in the meetups back during COVID. Like, we can simplify how we're doing this. But why are we playing by these old rules in a new thing, right? Domain-driven design didn't rely on event sourcing. Event sourcing happened to kind of be in that community. So if you continue to kind of be playing along with where you started, there's an entirely different concept that's orthogonal to DDD, which is this, how you treat information, point, right?
I mean,
how did you arrive at this?
Because in the very beginning, right? When I started Axon, I felt like, hey, I need to event source some object, right? I need something to say, okay, this stream of events belongs to this thing, and then it was very natural to believe that, hey, the aggregates. If you look at the definition of the aggregate, is this thing that can consist of multiple entities, but they are always in a consistent state together.
Yeah.
Wait, that's exactly what I want, right? A consistent state. So let me use the aggregate. But for some reason, and I have to be honest, I have to put credits where they are. A colleague of mine, Sarah Pellegrini, she's actually the one that...
Oh, I remember. The posts about that, destroying the aggregate.
Yeah. And she started with this whole concept, and we were on a retreat with the engineering team in northern Serbia. This beautiful spa hotel, and we were just spending time in the pool having discussions about all sorts of things. And at some point, a little bit closer to the bar, she said, "Allard, I need to talk to you about something." And I said, "Sure, what?" And I thought, "Oh my God, you're not quitting or anything. Don't do that here, right?" But no, she said,
"We need to talk.
Want to kill the aggregate."
That's not a good thing to hear.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to kill the aggregate. I'm like, yeah, you could want that all you want, but it's not going to happen because it's really important. It's a core concept. She said, "No, hear me out." And she's the type of person, when she says, "Hear me out," you shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Because she'll have something useful to say, right? I think on the level of how good engineers are, she's really at the top. So you just shut up and listen. And she started to explain her feelings about the aggregate. So it's not just a consistency boundary; it is also a limitation on how to build your code and on what events you can access and all these things. And I started to realize, okay, I don't see how we can get rid of it, but I can see how it's a problem.
Yeah.
And then we started long discussions, and it took us quite a while to figure out how we could get rid of it. And conceptually, conceptually we figured it out, and now also in implementation, it takes a lot of. It took us quite a bit of engineering to make sure we could do it at similar performance characteristics, and even the scalability characteristics are very important. We have customers storing billions and billions of events.
Then it's an indexing thing, right? So I have a lot of conversations with Chris Condren. He's the former CEO of EventStoreDB, now current, and then he worked extensively on like the indexing part of like the streams and the aggregates and whatever you would have. Back then, it was definitely like stream of events per aggregate, and aggregate ID is the thing you would have to kind of lump in all the events that have to deal with that one particular thing. It kind of sounds like because a stream is now an entity, right? And so when I started to look at the consistency boundary in the meetup, I actually came at it from the non-event sourcing side. Like, even if you're doing domain-driven design and you look at the aggregate and you say that, okay, I have an order item, and then I have some order items that's a collection, and then I have another object here that's the address and delivery method and something else maybe. I have this graph. when you take a command or a method on the aggregate root and say that I want to cancel the order, you think about an ORM, you don't have to, you can have this lazy loading where you don't have to look at the rest of the things. You really don't have to interrogate the state of the aggregate or even the aggregate object itself, the aggregate root. You can just say cancel it. And so that means like your boundary shrinks down to just what you need. So even without event sourcing, we were already kind of looking at this. But obviously, I translated that as quickly as possible. Like, hey, these streams can be sparse. My function to filter can now be more effective. I don't have to just filter on the stream level. I can filter on this. But now we're looking at other things. Like, what about including things outside of the stream? Like when,
multiple streams,
as we do an event model, we usually feed in a green box as part of the input to a blue box for a command to say that, oh, by the way, the current total orders outstanding is $900. That has to be a parameter on the command. If you have an invariant that is that states that you can't open an order if there's too much money in open orders or something like that. So that is a cross-entity kind of concern. And so how do you feed that in? And if you abandon the idea now that you have to go through the aggregate root of order to do that operation, if you now say that the action of starting a new order is something that has to have a different stream to look at, which is the total open orders, let's say. Not even orders, but open orders. I don't want to have to say all orders and then filter by open orders. I can actually think of all the events that have happened and make my own index of things that just show me the total, right? And things like that. So this is where we're getting to. And I think one of the things that I'm starting to look at is really where this isn't just based on per event, filtering events, but filtering down to event properties themselves. So I'm now no longer satisfied with a JSON object for an event. I want a directory for the event, and I want a file per pair for each tuple of key value for each of those properties, right? That's because now at the file level, at least I can work with indexing. I can use hard links, soft links to make weird other things as I see fit, right? So that's, it's amazing after all these years that we're only now starting to really look at this, because it was so hard to even just get the basic idea across in the industry, that now we feel confident enough to go to the next level with this level. Do you find any parallels with what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's so when she started the discussion around let's kill the aggregates, it felt like it was a crazy idea. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. So I said, let's try.
Yeah.
If ideas are stupid and don't make sense, you should give it a try for sure.
Yeah.
And the further we went, the more we found out that, yes, there's something to it. And if you imagine something at really small scale, right? Just imagine. So we did an example with students and courses, right? You can create a course and it has a certain number of spots, and then students subscribe to that course. And then if you look at it as a human, and you read the story that the events, in the end, events just represent a story, right? It's just a little, it's what do you call it? The book where you write your
syllabus,
Dear Diary. It's a diary, right?
Yeah.
Except that the events don't start with Dear Diary all the time.
Oh yeah.
But you can just read it, and then you know what happened. And as a human, when you read that story, you'll know, oh, this course is full.
Yes.
So when I want to add another student to this course, the system will have to say no.
Yeah.
We can reason about that, but we created these artificial boundaries where our system is not allowed to see that. Our system is not allowed to look at something. They have the student, and you have the course. Student stays in student, and course stays in course.
Yeah. Exactly.
Why would we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because of scale. Otherwise, it doesn't scale. And then we say, okay, let's challenge that, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if we can make it scale. even with the index. So basically, yeah, it's about indexes. Not even sure what we call them. We're changing names as well. I think we call them tags or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, so categorize them by not
yeah,
imposing a
exactly.
hierarchy, which is yeah, lends itself to tagging. Yeah,
Exactly. You just want all events about something, right?
that's right.
I want events that talk about the state of this order, and it
Yeah.
could be, or I want the events that talk about the items
Hmm.
in this particular order, or all of the order in which
Yeah.
this item is represented,
Yeah.
or
But even if you drill
whatever.
down to the properties of events, you get an even more interesting thing, which is what I'm exploring, which is maybe too much for a lot of people. But you have a transactional integrity by the fact that they're, all of these properties are in one event at least. So it gives you that. But then you have an interesting Venn diagram of, like, for different purposes, what's involved in each one and how they overlap. And from there, you can actually say, well, it makes sense to have pessimistic or optimistic locking in these scenarios when these things overlap. And you could now have an organized way of showing a hierarchy of what can lock what and never get into these circular problems. And that's one of the things that I love about event sourcing, is that time moves forward. And when you're looking at things like race conditions and locking and all that, it's very simple. It's like, to me, it becomes as simple as, like, why do you not have circular references in Git, right? That is why, because event sourcing
Yeah,
is like Git, that it's impossible to do a circular reference, right?
you can't
Unless
look
you
for.
unless you explicitly try
Yeah.
to force it, right? But then you have this content addressable thing in Git where, like, you can't have chicken and egg problem. You have to have the hash to do the reference, and it doesn't work. So yeah.
And one thing that struck me as well is that when I try to explain event sourcing to people, unfortunately, much of what we do, and I guess it's the same for you as well, still is you have to explain a lot of people what event sourcing is.
Yes.
Of course, first tell them that event streaming is something different and all
Yes.
that. We know,
Hmm.
we know those struggles. But if you take the aggregate or those stream limitations out of the equation entirely, I found it much easier to talk about what event sourcing is and
Yes.
how it works.
Yeah.
And with BCB, we found that it is actually more simple.
Yeah.
It just that, I mean, something happened in the past that makes you not want to do something from now on.
Yes.
Well, if that operation comes in, and actually to make the link to event modeling, because I think event modeling is really good at telling you, or basically designing, and then therefore also telling you, this is the scenario where this can happen, right? And there's certain conditions. There's always conditions, and you build some given when then tests to
Hmm.
show that, or not tests, sorry,
Yeah.
specifications. So
Yeah.
when this happens, then this scenario does not apply, but it does apply when these things happen. That's the only thing you care about. Just
Yeah.
look for those events. Look which of those 3, 4, 5, whatever patterns is actually the case.
Yeah.
Why would you want to go through all of the history of a bank account
Yeah.
just because you have an operation that acts on a bank account? You
Yeah.
don't need all of that. You specify what is it, what are the invariants
Yeah.
in terms of things that have happened in the past.
And I mean,
And the
even
only
looking
thing
into the
really,
future, like this, what you just said is really limiting scope and actually being very aware by everyone involved, people writing the requirements, people implementing it, or even AI implementing it. When you take the AI example, you have this horrible mess that people are creating with allowing, say, give me a complete system that does this, and then they just keep adding ad hoc words to tweak it so it gives them what they want. It's horrible. When you're applying event modeling and event sourcing to a problem that AI will solve, you're giving the AI the scope to solve that one step properly. Right? So there's very little
yeah.
room for it to hallucinate. Whereas if you just give it the whole system, hey, make me this, you know, who knows what it'll think up. So I
That's how
think,
all projects work, right?
yeah,
Except that you
whether
don't
it's
give it
AI or
to
not,
AI,
right?
but you give it to a development team. Just
Yeah,
build me
exactly.
something that does
Well, the
magic
developers didn't
and
know what
build
you're
it.
talking about, so they built this. Don't give them crap, right? The good thing about AI is that it shows just how people were abusing developers by saying, like, I'm not a mind reader, right? Like, I don't know what
Well,
you really want.
AI shows you it's a
You did a
crap
crap job with the
specification like 2 minutes
requirements.
later.
Why are you hanging me for the failure of the project, right? Like, so I think it's really good. I think event modeling, event sourcing, and AI are kind of in my mind, the kind of solution to move forward past the level of productivity that we're getting because of these models giving us so much. I mean, to me, that's just really, it hasn't changed programming at all, but it's taken out so much waste out of programming. I mean, I'm no longer going switching my window to a browser to go to Stack Overflow to look at the 5 or 10 things that I found are more popular and read the comments and all that. And, you know, an hour later, I can continue with my next 3 lines of code. You know, I'm getting that in the IDE, you know, and I can start to interject some syntax to see if it'll make the prediction a little different. And each one of those is erasing an hour of diving around. So we haven't solved the problem of people putting bad systems together or doing bad requirements. What we've done is made those things more apparent more quickly. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a sidetrack there, because we have 2 things that are kind of evolving. Like there's the whole technology moving forward, which is the AI movement, and where we have these important concepts of context, and then we have event sourcing itself moving in that. And I think there's some parallels here, where with the the DCB approach, you're actually zeroing in on what the scope, and if you're talking in AI terms, what is your context window, as they call it, and how many tokens are using up. And
we want to narrow that down.
Absolutely, right. And we totally can, like you mentioned, with event modeling, you can graphically show the business person and the developer that this is the scope for solving this particular step, right? And it's not now just some random words thrown into a use case or a ticket somewhere, where someone might write a sentence one way, someone might write it a different way, and it's really all this subjective stuff kind of goes away. It's like, look, I need this to happen. Here's an by example of the steps. Like, if I see this on the screen, what's on the event model, if I see that actually happening in the application, thumbs up, it works, right? That is like, it either does it or it doesn't, right? Whereas the use cases, we're all kind of subject to interpretation a lot.
And what I like about event modeling, which in hindsight I miss in the current Axon version as well, but that's going to be changed with DCB entirely, is that you have these nice slices, right? And the slices are clearly identifiable. I mean, there's no discussion about where the slice starts and where it ends.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if you're not familiar with event modeling, you can have a discussion, but it's a clear boundary, right? This is where it starts. This is where it ends.
Yeah.
There's no discussion about it. But now also we want that in code to live exactly with the same level of isolation from the rest.
Exactly.
And that's the part that with streams that are identified or aggregates, there was a discussion online, like, we don't have aggregates anyway. I said, okay, how do you do it? Well, we just have streams with identifiers. I'm like, okay, you can call it differently, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You still have this artificial boundary that connects, essentially it connects all different slices somewhere.
Yeah.
For no apparent reason, but just looking at the diagram, for no apparent reason, they're connected. Of course, if you dive deeper, you can find how they're connected.
Yeah.
But if you follow the rules people use to decide whether different, let's say, slices belong to the same aggregate or stream or not, you eventually have to put everything into what we always call it the system aggregate.
Yeah.
Eventually, everything is connected to everything else somehow in terms of consistency.
Exactly.
Right?
Whether it's implicit or explicit. Exactly. Yeah. Because
and then you get back to our beautiful ORM that we started with, right?
I know. Well, yeah, not really.
We don't want that. So we've chosen some heuristics to say, okay, in this case, we're going to split boundaries and accept some eventual consistency there. But we don't have to. We don't have to accept the eventual consistency.
Yeah.
We just need to let go of this concept of aggregates or these strong consistency boundaries that are predefined and that we need to cram everything into.
I think it's quite evident if you're thinking about CQRS, that there's an entire different system that takes care of the transaction side, right? And you're already making that distinction for the projections on the read side. You should continue down that road of having all of these separations, and now you can dive into the right side and say, look, I have other separations here that make sense. That we can apply the same kind of diligence to be able to find that am I really locking too much down to do one simple thing? Do I have a pessimistic or optimistic lock on too much to do what I want? And a lot of times the answer is yes. Like with the cancellation
Absolutely.
order thing, it's like, do I need to lock the whole stream down for doing that, or vice versa? If I need more context, now I have to artificially do eventual consistency, like you said, and feed in what a green box is into a command to then be able to do something on a single aggregate, right? Yeah, those are anyway. We're definitely on on the same thing, and it's kind of neat that all of this coevolution happened at the same time in different parts of the world. One in Serbia, and then we had this meetup that happened for many years now. I think it's from 2015, 2016. Anyway, it was the event sourcing and CQRS and DDD meetup, and it was like criticized in Vancouver for having the most acronyms, most clumsy name for a meetup that anyone's ever seen.
Yeah.
So people showed up going, "What the hell is this?" Right?
Yeah,
But people
exactly.
that knew were there. Eventually, was the event-driven meetup, and then when COVID hit, we took it online, and that's kind of when we started to look at relaxing some of these rules, because it felt like, all right, this we're feeling, that idea that you said, DDD, you felt like it's there, but we're still getting complexity. I feel it's too much. What's the next thing you discover? Event sourcing. Again, we're at that point with event sourcing. Okay, this feels good, but these aggregates and other things that we're still using, they feel like there's a limit. What's the next thing
Yeah.
we can do? So I think there's this co-evolution happening around the world when people get these concepts in. You find your own ways of expressing the same thing, that we need to refine this a bit. We need to not be as constrained as we were. We have knowledge and tools and all that. So I think it's good to kind of jump in the code, kind of to show some of this stuff. Because I want to get going on Axon, and you promised you're going to guide me through installing Axon framework and the JVM, and see if we can break my computer in the process.
Oh, certainly. With a JVM, that won't be difficult. No, just kidding.
You're giving me nightmares here, like reminding me of like the JVM stuff. Even to get like Minecraft running back in the day, like all this command line stuff. Like, how much memory? I need to tell this thing how much memory it's allowed to use. What? I just want to run it.
Oh, no, it just takes everything it can just by default. Don't worry about it.
So maybe we can start with just like showing you kind of like what I've been working on, and ask you to kind of give your comment and your critique of like the simplest, dumbest thing that could work to do event sourcing, and then how we can move this from the rudimentary crap event sourcing that I'm doing here, which is 2 methods, and to actually swap in something nice like Axon framework. So we don't have to start from scratch. We can have this thing and implement a slice on top of Axon framework, and maybe even see how we could switch out the infrastructure to use Axon to access the events and all that. So I'm going to switch to the code sharing thing. And if you have code too, let me know. I can switch
Yeah.
to your screen.
I have a demo that I always have ready to use.
Oh, let's
if you
do
want
your
to
demo
use some
first, and then
coding.
we'll go. Let's do that.
So
I didn't know you had it
I'll
ready.
just-
Let me switch my the screen. So this is the screen for sharing that I have now. So I can go back to.
I'm trying to press share screen, but it doesn't do anything. And I wonder why.
I can go back here. There is a button there to share. I know there is.
Yeah, I'm pressing it, but it doesn't do anything.
Oh, okay. I shouldn't have to do anything on that.
Here I go. No, I'm fine.
You got it?
I
Once I see your camera switch, I'll switch to the. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's loading. Loading.
Okay, I pressed the button so many times.
I see it.
have
No,
the
it's working.
window
I
on
see your
pop
code.
out.
I see your code.
Okay,
I see your code.
I have.
Actually, I
lot of
don't see the
pop-ups
code.
and
It's very
it's
small.
I will make it a little bit larger.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'll go into presentation mode, which probably.
I think you can set it up to have different font sizes per mode. So
Yeah, there's a presentation mode, which I think opens up a new window. Okay, I have a new laptop and I don't have my shortcut here. View. and it has a presentation mode. Yes, and it is a new window, which means I need to reshare it. Right. So this should be more readable.
I still don't see it. It's still not
sorry?
sharing. It's still not sharing.
It's not sharing. Okay.
Whatever you did last time worked, but this time it didn't. That's my fault. I forced Allard to use Discord for this. I mean, we usually do something else. So blame me for this.
I'm usually quite good with computers, but this time it's.
I'm starting to doubt it. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, there it is. I have to click something. It's actually on me. I have to watch the stream. So it's weird how it did that. So pardon me here. I have to go and. I don't know why it's doing that because I'm capturing it on here. So I have to click on watch stream. I don't know why it switched it right away. That's good. Now I can see it. Okay.
Right.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry about that.
What I have here is a very simple application. It's a bike rental. And actually, I do also have an event model for it. I don't have it open, but it is a fairly simple application. There's a bunch of bikes in the system, and then you can select one bike and say, I want to reserve that bike. It redirects you to a payment system. You make a payment, and then the bike unlocks so you can ride it, right? And that's the quite a simple approach, but I wanted to have all of the components in there. There's an automation that interacts that takes care of the interaction between the payment system and the bike rental part. So you actually see in the project there, this is the payment system. So there's a few classes in here to represent a payment application. So this is our third-party payment provider, if you will. I will not dive into that one because it's supposed to be a black box and nobody really understands how these things are built.
Yep.
And we have the bike rental application in itself. This is an Axon with Spring Boot application. By the way, it is publicly available. You can just clone it on GitHub. I think my handle is Allard Buijze. Unfortunately, I chose my last name as the part.
I feel your pain. My last name's horrible, and so I try to avoid that. I usually use event modeling instead.
Yeah. That makes sense. So I tend to choose Allard Buijze now. It's a little bit easier for people to remember, but on GitHub you can find it. It's called Bike Rental Extended, so it has all the bells and whistles. It's a Spring Boot application, and yes, there's already a bit of code because this is really already configured to run at scale.
Yeah.
So I can run these as microservices. So right now it's one big monolith, but I can separate it into microservices and scale it and run any number of instances of any component that I want, and they just cooperate. So that's why there's a bit more configuration. The only thing I really need is just this part and this one that says, okay, just hey, Spring Boot, please run my application. So let me move to the important
That's the thing
stuff.
that freaks me about Java is the level of imports, the amount of external libraries.
Yeah, true. Usually IntelliJ, I don't know why it doesn't do that right now. Usually it just collapses everything, and because it knows you don't want to see those imports. It's imports are useful, technically useful. But they are really worth being put at the bottom of the file.
I know. Yeah. So, but there's code collapsing, right, which we kind of use. And I'm of the same opinion that you want the important stuff right there in front of you ASAP, not swim through.
And it collapses this, which is much more important. Anyway, so let's go to our beloved aggregate. So in Axon, and I know this is a little bit of a theme sometimes and a topic of discussion, but what you can do in Axon is you can put your command handlers directly on the aggregate itself. And that was essentially done because a command handler, typically what it does is it takes a command and then goes to a repository to retrieve an aggregate based on an identifier
Yeah.
found in the command. And then on that aggregate, just call some methods to change its states and to do some validation.
Yes.
And we thought, hey, the framework can do that for you. It can load the aggregate for you. You just need to tell it which field on the command is the identifier you want to use. So if we go to request bike, it is the bike ID that's in the request bike. That is
target
the
aggregate. Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So what happens is when this command arrives in the system, Axon will load the correct bike, which means that it will load the events for this particular bike and replay all of history, even though we don't care about the entire history, but DCB is not implemented here yet. And then when we handle it, we say, okay, well, we do our state checks, and then we can apply an event. We just say, okay, apply a bike requested. In this case, we're good. So the aggregate is very functional, right? There's no technical concerns about scalability. It's just that, okay, I just want to make sure that in this case, if an approval comes in, I want to make sure that the approval is actually done for the person that reserved this particular bike. And if that's not the case, just ignore the approval. It's probably an old one that was taking too long to arrive or whatever. Fine. If that's not the case, then just apply. Right? Of course, you can discuss if you want to invert this, if this is more beautiful or whatever. But code style is a different discussion, etc. And then we have the beautiful event sourcing handlers, and those are the method that changed the state of this bike, right? The historic. This is basically applying the function of state changes on this particular instance of a bike. And essentially, this class is all you need to build a command handler, and there's nothing much else that you would need to do to make it run. If we go to the projection, I have my bike status projection. So one of the, I'm not sure why there's an Axon framework plugin. Okay, there's IntelliJ updates. Maybe that's the problem. But this is my projection. Of course, a projection handles events and then updates a relational model. In this case, I'm using Spring Data JPA, which is a library for extremely lazy people like me. That just magically just stores it. Because in this case, I really could not be bothered with what kind of database, what kind of SQL dialect should I use. I don't care. Normally in a real life project, you would care a little bit more because it does have performance implications. But this is not a real life project. This is just, we want to keep it simple. I'll skip the update emitter for a second. But so when somebody requests a bike, well, then we go to the status repository. We find the entry for this particular bike. And we just say, okay, now it's requested by this particular renter, so that my projections are updated as well. Now, one thing we support in Axon Framework is what we call subscription queries. So typically queries are, I ask a question, I get an answer, boom, that's the end of our communication. But with subscription queries, what you can do is you can say, keep me up to date on, and then I can say, keep me up to date on a particular bike.
Okay.
So I do a subscription query and say I want to subscribe to all changes, but it's not the events that I care about, but the changes in this particular projection.
Okay.
So when something happens that alters the state of that bike, I'm going to send the new status of this particular projection to the client, so I can build real-time UIs really easily. There's not much code that you need to do. Yeah, you need to decide when to emit this update. So there's two queries that we need to support. One is called find all. So, okay, send an update for this one. If the query was a find all, it's called find all. And the other one is, and this is a bit of a dirty shortcut, I still need to fix it, but because there's one query that has one parameter. So I say if my query parameter is a string, then I know it's the other query, which is quite ugly. But if I asked for updates of a single bike, and that single bike that you're asking updates for is the one that I just updated, then I want to send my bike status, the new status. Oops, sorry. the new status for this particular bike.
Right.
So I'll switch in a second to the bike rental. There's a colleague of mine quickly built a UI for it, so we can actually see the code in action as well. This is the UI, and there's a payment saga, which is actually a payment process. Long story. We
We can get
accidentally called them sagas.
You have to come back next week for another one to discuss sagas.
Yes. Oh yeah, there's a lot to be said about those, and we're killing aggregates, but sagas are definitely next.
Yeah.
Well, you can't completely get rid of them, I think.
Oh,
but,
I've done it. I'm
always
happy.
automation.
I've done it. It's let me encourage you to do so.
Yeah, well, I found a lot of places where sagas are just there to solve problems that you cause yourself.
That's right.
But anyway, this one takes care of making sure that when a bike is requested, that we ask a payment system to prepare a payment, and when the payment is confirmed, to confirm that the bike is rented. And it keeps the payment system obviously nicely separated from all the components that use it. But also the bike itself is not dependent on the payment system behavior. So this is that coordination. So what I can do is I can run, let me just run this application, rental application, and payment application. And now I need to guess which one was there we go. There it's starting. And the other one is starting, and I hope I started everything properly. And now I need to do a little trick to switch to.
Yeah, I really miss JetBrains tooling. I think we were talking before we went live about, me wanting to do more with AI, and just at the time Cursor was out, and JetBrains didn't really have the equivalent in terms of the the same kind of experience, especially with the terminal integration and things like that. But I do really miss the what JetBrains has done in terms of being able to walk the abstract syntax tree. I think they'll win in the end, because their abstractions behind the scenes of the code structure in each language is going to be, they're going to have the advantage there. And when the large language models are using a better API for manipulating the AST, like what that has, I think they'll come out on top in the end. And I'll switch back, because the minute that happens, I'm switching back. I'm telling you.
Exactly. Well, we built a plugin, and it's the syntax trees are not always easy to navigate. But
no, of
because
course,
everything is a node, right?
Yeah,
you have to figure out, okay, what kind of node is my node? Is it?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's it is true that there's a lot of there's some decent power behind it.
Yeah.
So this is my beautiful UI, and it's really the minimalistic thing that we need to make it work. And it's my system is completely empty. You can see the list of bikes, and this is basically the view of this bike status projection.
Yeah.
So I have my my button to generate bikes, and then you see the bikes. Now, what this does in the background, there's a subscription query on the find all. So keep me up to date on all the bike statuses. And it just it sends all the updates using service sent events. Right?
Yeah.
Fairly simple. So we see the status of this. And because I'm lazy, I created with this endpoint that says run a couple of rental cycles. And I know there's a bit of overloading of terms here, but basically what that does is it does a query first to say, okay, what are available bikes right now? And it randomly picks one of the available bikes and requests it. That request gives you a reference back to a, let's say, a payment link. So you go to the payment link, you confirm the payment, and the payment provider gives an okay, and then you can go to your bike. The bike is released, and then it is delivered or returned in a random other location in the world. Actually, you'll see people cycling from New York to Berlin, but it's returned in a random location and then available again, and then the next cycle starts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 64 of those loops, 8 of them at the same time. And there's a delay of 100 milliseconds plus a little variation of 25% on between all of the steps. So it's going to go pretty fast.
Oh, wow.
As you can see, it just moves along, and now
Mm-hmm.
everything is available again.
Mm-hmm.
The fun
Wow.
thing is, and switching now from one screen to another, I should have just shared my entire window, I guess. But
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, you can
we'll
still do
see in a
that. I
minute.
mean, do it again so
Yeah,
people
let
can see.
me.
We're not short on time, so I want to give you as much time as you want. So, and it's a live stream, so people are expecting this. I'm recording it, and we can chop out the other pieces if you want to use this later.
Let me share my entire screen. I'll just share screen 2. There we go. Right, so now I can properly switch. And now what happens is we should see some exceptions here. Yes. So, hey, my request bike command resulted in an exception that the bike was already rented.
Yep.
And this is the birthday paradox, I think it's called, right? Is when well, there's a set of 10 bikes, and if I choose 8, well, if 8 concurrent processors look at those 10 bikes and pick one randomly, there's
Yep.
going to be conflicts, right?
Yep.
And obviously that happens.
Yep.
So there's this in this particular business case, there's a really strong requirement that no 2 people can reserve the same bike at the same
Yes.
time. So a bike makes a perfect sense as an
Yeah.
aggregate.
Well, we're getting into
To
a
some
discussion
degree.
on two-phase commit here, so.
Where?
Well, I mean, just
Oh,
locking and
oh,
row locks and like why? Oh, listen, event sourcing seems really complex here. Why don't you just use a database so that you know that if the bike is rented?
oh my God. Well, event sourcing uses a database. It's
I
called an
know.
event store. Oh, two-phase commits. Am I happy I left those in the
Yeah.
what was it? In the zeros. That's where they belong, together
Yeah.
with SOA and
Yeah.
that kind of beautiful stuff.
One of the things that I love about this is that you just really can show the concurrency problem right there, and just
Yeah,
it's
and
not
it's not
hidden
a
behind
problem.
magic, right? It's
No, exactly, and
yeah.
it's not a big deal. I mean, it does exactly what we want.
Hmm.
So if we switch back to my oops, UI, where is it? There it is. Of course we can do it again, and it still it still runs, and we get our live updates.
Yeah.
So there's a Docker container running behind this with Axon Server on it, and this is the dashboard for it. So it shows you a little diagram of this is my one Axon Server node. I'm running the free version, right? The version you can just download and play around with and
Hmm.
run. And
Promise me
it's
we'll get to
connected to two,
that. I want to do it on
yeah,
my
there's
machine.
two
Yeah.
two applications currently connected to it, right?
Yeah.
Which is my rental monolith and I'm the payment provider that I'm simulating.
Hmm.
And I can actually look at the events, and I can do live updates. It's more fun. So I can go and do some rentals and switch back, and now you see this live updating. And of course, you don't want to do this in a production system because you'll never be able to read anything.
Yeah.
But in a demo, it works. And here we can see the aggregate stream. So I can take this aggregate identifier and filter on that one and say, okay, this is all the events for this particular bike, right?
Yeah.
It's fairly simple. We can get a little bit of an overview on what commands are being sent where. Well, there's only one node running.
Hmm.
This application is not handling anything. So there's all sorts of information you can see on this one.
Nice.
Um, but in this case, Axon Server takes care of. So it's not just an event store. It is also it takes care of all the messaging. So if you look at an event model, the dominant colors of stickies are blue, green, and orange.
Yeah.
And we represent each of those explicitly as messages. So if we go to I call that the core API, because essentially that is the description of the system's behavior. All the rest, anything that it's not a sticky is just an implementation detail.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. This is the messages. So I have my commands, I have my events, and I think I Yeah, I took a shortcut on the queries, but queries are also messages. I just took a shortcut here. But yeah, commands and events are messages. An Axon server makes sure that those messages are routed automatically to the right instance.
Mm-hmm.
So right now there's only 2 applications running, and it's not that special, but I have a little shell script. And the shell script turns my application into microservices.
Nice.
So this is as long as it takes to create
Yeah.
microservices from a monolith, right?
Good.
And that's it. So right now, of course I did cheat because it's a demo. You're allowed to cheat. I had already prepared these modules, but what I've done is I've taken my this is my command module now, and there already was an application. This is a Spring Boot application, and it has 3 classes in it. It's fairly small, right? This is my Spring Boot application class. I copied my bike into here. This to make sure that I get a snapshot every 10 events. Just because bike is a
I noticed
really
something
poor
that
aggregate.
I noticed something that wasn't working before. Your imports are compressed now. They weren't before. That's good. We had them expanded the other time for some reason.
I think I accidentally did that. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, continue. Sorry for the interruption.
There's my Saga, and then I have my query, which contains my projection and the Spring Data JPA repository, which is my lazy man's database access.
Yeah.
And then we have the UI part, and this is basically the backend for front end, which is just my controller that has my it's a REST controller, my request mappings, post and get operations are in there. So now they're all separate little modules that I can start. So let me just stop. I don't actually have to, but let me stop this application. See if I can do this in a little bit faster way. I'll start each of the microservices just once. And I should be able in our overview here to see them pop up. Oops.
Oh yeah, there they are.
There's one. There should be 5 in total in a minute. There's a second one, 4th, and there you go. So there's my 5.
I like that you make the other ones disappear as you're moving the other one.
Yeah, so you can see which application connects because you can have multiple contexts.
Yeah. It makes it easy
to see which application.
That's awesome. Yeah. Nice UI. That's good.
So and I can go to, and this is the most boring part of the demo. I can go back to my application. I do have to refresh the UI because sometimes it disconnects the server sent event stream, but there you go. And it just works. Except now that all the messages are going to different applications, of course, still running on my laptop, but they're crossing JVM boundaries and they're communicating across different boundaries. I haven't changed a single line of code, right? I've just copied classes.
No, that's the beautiful thing about event sourcing, right? Is that you're making all the business logic travel into whatever topology you want without really worrying about it. I mean, this is one of the biggest selling points I saw right away, right?
Yeah. But now what I can do, and this is because the routing, if you route a command, I mean, if you route 2 commands for the same bike, you probably want to send them to the same destination so you can locally optimize with caches and stuff like that. But you can also prevent a few conflicts that you would otherwise not be able to prevent, because if you know you're going to hit the same bike twice, you might as well do the second one after you finish the first one, because you know it's going to be a conflict anyway.
Right.
That's the beauty of CQRS. You know that a command, the intent is to change the state. So the chance that you're changing state of your system is really high.
Yes.
So what I can do is I can start a second instance of my command application. Let me start a third one. I feel lucky today. And I will start a query as well. All right. Let me not go too far so I can see my command. There's 3 now. And my query, there's 2.
Nice.
Right. So there's 2 instances. And again, it doesn't change anything. I mean, why would the behavior of a system change when you change the topology of your deployment?
Yeah, and I think this illustrates like why once you go to event sourcing and for me, event sourcing is the default. It's never the other way around now because of this. I know that I'm future proof for anything, right? It's crazy.
Actually, today somebody quoted a quote I did for 10 years ago, and it was a post on LinkedIn, and he said that I said something 10 years ago that really struck him, and right now it's still sort of in his head, and it's what we're used to do is when we think about a scalable system, and I'm using we here as the mostly as they.
Yeah.
But when we build a system that needs to be scalable, we tend to build it at scale. So we build something really large.
Yeah.
But building a scalable system has to be small.
Yeah.
And then you have to build it in a way that allows you later on to scale if you need to,
That's right.
when you need to, and
That's
not
right.
a second before. And event sourcing for me is that, and that's something event streaming will not do for you, but event sourcing will, is
Mm-hmm.
it gives you that possibility to scale whenever you need. And you can scale functionally because you can add features later on, new projections. If you think that, hey, we've been reusing projections a little bit too much, and for this one, we really should have something else, great, just build something else. Not
Yeah.
a problem. Just go for it, build it, and start using it. You don't have to worry about your data model and all these the tools you talked about earlier with all the migration scripts, right? It's
Oh
like, oh
yeah.
my God, don't even get me started, right?
Yeah.
It's really cool problems to solve, but they're not relevant. You don't have to solve those problems, and you'll be much faster if you don't have to.
Yeah,
So
I mean that's one of the things is that I have when I'm doing event sourcing, I have zero worries about if this thing will need to be gigantic, if this will be successful, and any part of the system that I'll need to have as a scaling across 10 nodes, 100 nodes, it's just not scary, which is not what I would say for traditional giant Oracle backend systems that I worked on before.
No, absolutely not. I remember projects where you had to think about server capacity up front, right? Because you had to order the servers that you needed and all that. I mean, it's premature optimization, right? And we do that in the software. We still do that every day.
Yeah.
Well, we as in they. But
So
with what I like about event sourcing is that you just focus on the little thing that really matters, which is initially just the business logic.
yeah.
Nothing else. Leave all the technicalities where they should be, which is somewhere else. And we'll get to the technicalities once they become an issue. And then you solve them in a place that is not in the same place as where your business logic is. You can
Yeah.
solve them somewhere else. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to mix technical concerns and business logic concerns anymore.
Yeah.
They change for different reasons, so they should be in different places.
And do you have tests in this project just for the people that still love testing?
Of course, they are my monolith. There they go. Source test Java. So let's talk. So what I have is I say I have a test fixture for my bike.
Mm-hmm.
And I say when there's nothing happened, when I register a bike, I expect that event to be published.
That's nice.
When
yeah.
I have a bike that's registered and I request it, then I expect a result from that command, which is I think the payment identifier, and I expect an event that is a message. Yeah, there's some random identifier in there, so you have to kind of work your matchers around it and say, well, I don't really care what the exact structure of the event is, as long as the type is a bike requested event and it talks about the right bike ID and the right name of the rider. Right? And there's no other events, but this one is expect no events. You can test for exceptions. And this is basically the event modeling given when then
exactly.
scenarios that you can describe.
Well,
right? Nothing else.
I don't want to take credit for given when then. That's BDD stuff with Goiko and others, right? Dan North and all those guys that really pushed behavior-driven development, right?
Yeah, but doing that on the level of where you define your event model stickies is, I think, the only place where they belong. Everything else I would test has nothing to do with business logic
That's
anymore. It
right.
has to do with a specific choice of implementation that I've made,
Yeah,
which is not the thing you should test. You should not test your implementation. You should test whether your implementation behaves the way people have said the system should behave like. And to me, to me, this is the unit test. When we talk about a unit
yeah,
is not a class. A
yeah.
unit is it should be a functional unit. It is a logical component in the system, which in our case is a bike, which, okay, it is still an aggregate. I don't like it. We'll get rid of it. A unit is the command.
Yeah,
This particular command behaves, or the system will behave this way in this situation for this command, and it will behave another way in another condition for the
that's
same
right.
command. That is my unit.
Yeah,
Anything else? So it's the unit is a slice, nothing else.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when I register and when the bike is requested, I approve. This is the kind of test cases that we have, right?
Yeah, I
Of
like the
course.
DSL there that you have, and this fixture here is part of the Axon library. The fixture
It's
given
part
when
of Axon
expect events.
framework.
Axon framework. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah, that's
it
good.
tests for a couple of common mistakes as well. So especially those that are new to event sourcing, they sometimes make an accidental mistake of changing state in a command handler instead of using the event sourcing handlers to change state, which can become very problematic because you're making a state change that actually won't survive. Right?
Right.
As soon as you rehydrate your aggregate, it's gone. So what
Yeah.
the fixture does is it takes your given events, it executes the command that you send. It checks whether the expected event matches the actual outcome of the command.
Right.
And then it takes your given event plus the actual outcome of the command, rehydrates another aggregate instance, and checks if the state of that instance is exactly the same as the one you've left on the command after the
Okay.
command
Yeah.
was executed. And if there's any difference, you'll have an illegal state change. Maybe I can actually show that.
So you're actually looking at
Maybe.
the intermediate state of the aggregate internally to also check
Yeah.
whether it's in the okay. Yeah, I just don't care about that now. I think the event is the state, so I'm of the opinion that that's an implementation detail at this point. But I guess if you're doing things this way,
it should be, but people make mistakes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So let's say that I accidentally changed the state when I request a bike. Oh wait, it's going to be reserved by Allard, right? Oops, it happens.
Yeah.
Let me rerun the test. My event is still correct, right?
Yeah.
Now it says, hey, hold on. It says, hey, wait, my working aggregate says Allard, so that's how I left it with this particular state. But when I rehydrate it from all the events that it generated, it gives me a different one.
Yeah, yeah.
You probably made a mistake, and I think here, illegal state change detected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
so
great.
It tells you, oh, reserved by. Oh, that's the one.
So and
I've seen situations where this is really subtle, right?
Sometimes really of course. Difficult to and that's I think when people are still new to event sourcing and they don't understand the importance of the event being the state, and really that once they, publish the events, write the event to disk, they shouldn't be doing anything else, right? Changing whatever.
That's the event.
Yeah, yes. That's it, right? So. But we have these deep ruts in the road for a lot of people that have decades sometimes experience in the traditional way of doing things, and so you think you've built up guardrails for making mistakes there, and simply those things aren't here. And so we keep saying this, that the unlearning is so hard. Oh, yeah. People underestimate the amount of unlearning. I think they falsely think they can bring their experience and habits from their existing way of working to event sourcing. They'll have the same amount of success, and it's entirely opposite. It's really, I mean, we already touched on this at the beginning about horses and cars, but when you see it, in the tech level, there's a lot of, and I still struggled with a lot. And Jordas is in the chat here, and he's basically another topic we can get into another time if you want to do this again, is the whole idea about upcasters, new versions of an event. He's rightfully thrown them away. the
Oh yeah.
opinion is that you are centralizing how you interpret an event from one version to another. It should actually be up to each individual projection to see how it wants to treat that. So that is another one of these things that even in our event sourcing world, we're still getting we're still challenging things, but not in the traditional way of challenging event sourcing, saying that, oh, traditional is better. We're actually pushing it even to further than what event sourcing should be,
Yeah.
even further
I mean,
away from
event
the
sourcing
traditional
is
approach.
young, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we are just around, what is it, 15 years
yeah,
ish,
yeah,
and it's quite young. And I think what I really like about event sourcing, the community at least, is we're all pushing the boundaries, right?
yeah,
There's lots of discussions, and we're all challenging the way of working. But if you nobody's challenging the fundamentals of it, right?
yeah,
Fundamentally, the thing works, and the more people are familiar with event sourcing, the more they will say what you just said. It is the default. So unless I find a really, really good reason not to use event sourcing, I will just use event sourcing.
yeah.
Um, and of course, there's a lot of things that we've started doing because we've solved well, there's always challenges and there's always problems, and we've solved some of those challenges, which is okay. I always say if you look at code you've written a half a year ago, and there's not at least a little bit of a feeling of shame, then
Yeah,
you haven't made progress in that
yeah,
half year.
yeah, yeah,
But just imagine looking at an event structure you came up with half a year ago,
yeah.
and and of course there's business evolution that will trigger change, but there's also your understanding of that domain that will
Mm-hmm,
evolve. So
mm-hmm.
there will be change. And at the time we said, oh, we need to cope with that change. Let's build upcasters, and
Yeah,
I think it is a really good, interesting, nice solution.
yeah,
But if we can do without, it's even better.
yeah. It's taking things
And
away,
just like the
distilling.
aggregates, yeah,
It's distilling, and I
exactly.
think that's what we've been doing. Like, how
And
can
it,
this work? Yeah,
what's the author? I wish I had written I wanted to write a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time. Right. Okay. Some people. I know there's some people watching this that are
yeah,
shouting the name at the at the screen right now. I can't hear you. Anyway.
yeah, yeah,
But and that's what we're doing with event sourcing. We've got this pretty good foundation, I
yeah.
think. I mean,
Hmm. Well, we're
there's
at
a lot
least we're
of
not
things for
losing
sure.
information, right? So yeah,
Exactly, we've got it, and
yeah.
but we're refining it by
Yeah.
moving, yeah,
And we can
taking
adopt
stuff
the new
out,
things.
and
So, if you were using upcasters and now you decide not to, it's not a problem at
it
all.
doesn't matter. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Nothing's broken, right?
yeah,
You still have the thing that you had. But to Jordi's point, actually, we're working hard on Axon 5, and we're making quite a big paradigm shift, of course, with the aggregate not being a central
yeah,
element anymore, but much more slice based, if to take it into event modeling terms.
yeah.
But also, an event is a message, and a message is a data structure. And the way you want to represent that data structure in code is completely independent of the actual data structure. Of course,
Hmm.
not, well, I say completely independent. There has to be a relation because you need to be able to read it. But
Hmm.
so the way you want to map, let's say, 5 versions of old events to a new class, maybe you don't need upcasters because you just care about the three properties that haven't changed anyway.
Yeah,
Or maybe you just say, okay, in
absolutely.
some cases it's called this, and in some
Yeah.
cases it's called that. But either way, for me, it's
Well,
this. Great, you can map it. So
we should probably have a chat about that. Is just how does these dynamic context boundaries, how do they affect the upcasters and versioning? Because yeah, you're right. Like for some things, canceling an order, I really don't care about any version of any event,
yeah,
right? It can be quite extreme.
exactly.
And
As
then
long as
on
it's
the
cancelled, it's yeah.
yeah, and then on the converse side, when you're wanting to change something, but the requirement, the invariant is something that spans multiple entities, right? That starts to look at something else entirely. But even then, like if the event structure or the new information there, you can still make a decision whether it's relevant or not, and then that
Yeah.
allows you to not be affected by it. So I think this, yeah, this
The
DCB is going
fact
to
that you
unlock
can
a
be
lot.
very selective about what you care about
Yeah,
also means that a lot of changes will not affect you. So you
yeah,
don't have to worry about them. You only need to worry about the actual changes that do affect you, and
yeah.
they will be much more limited. And I also found that with the right amount of thinking up front,
Hmm.
and this is people are really anti-thinking sometimes,
Yeah,
but you need a proper amount of thinking up front
yeah,
about how the system should behave. You can't build a system if you don't know what it should behave like.
yeah,
And I've seen people do that,
yeah.
right? I mean, in the
Well,
end,
we're getting
you
into an
always
agile
need a
talk. I
UI,
think,
you need a database, right?
yeah, I think this is stemming from a lot of the agile, that the ultimate
Yeah.
thing in building systems is feedback loops, and while they're important, I think it entirely dismissed design, which is, I think,
I've
inherently
never
what
heard
we're.
about
What's that?
a feedback loop. I've never heard about a feedback loop that starts with build a random thing and ask
Yeah.
people for feedback.
Yeah, but apparently that's quite a lot of it, right? I mean,
Yes, exactly.
there's ideation phases where, the business folks will say, what are the goals of this application and all that, but you really do need to, have a plan, and I think that's what we're doing. So, yeah, we should probably have a chat about that at some other point when you have time. But I want to get your opinion on, I want to move at least some of the slices maybe into from my application into Axon. I'm kind of a big fan of the idea that is kind of behind the serverless movement, which is that I should be able to have a polyglot environment where I can have, some people developing in .NET, and some people developing on the JVM, and some people developing on Ruby, and they can all really not just have independent microservices working with each other, but they can actually be working on one service together and have each slice be in a different tech at an extreme. I don't want this to be a limiting factor. So I kind of want to get your opinion on the code base that I'm going to. You're talking about the bare minimum that can work. I can show you a really a really bad version of that if you want. Sorry, I'm wondering why. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me switch my screen. But let me share that and get your opinion how you would move this. How you would move this to Axon, and I'll walk you through the code. We can run it if we have time. But this is kind of, I've been refactoring it lately, thinking like actually reducing it. So as a this is a Node.js application that uses Express. So it's not even a single page app with like React or any fancy stuff. So it's quite easy. But I basically have all of the infrastructure stuff at the top, so we don't have to really worry about that getting in the way. Again, it's at the top, like we don't like.
All the unimportant stuff.
Unimportant stuff, right? We have all the express includes and use and all that. The same thing you had at the top of your classes, right? I did try to make it simple so that I shoved everything into one file. And the idea is that as we're going through the event model, this is the event model for it, by the way. So I just have it as a draw.io. So that's another thing that I did, is just put it as a draw.io file that's in the same repo, so that you can always look at, what the application does. And it's not a bike rental thing. This is an unconference scheduler. And so, I have my given when thens in here, and then of course, given thens for a read, and all that. And then I'll also have some automations, right, added in here. So it's pretty simple. And what I really wanted to do, why I have it in one giant file, is so that I can go from left to right and have the implementation top to bottom in the actual file. So if I look at these slices one by one, I actually see in code that once I get to the actual logic, I have them here, right? So there's the set conference name, which you'll notice is set conference name up here, and then the confirmation page, then the setting the dates, and then dates confirmation, and the rooms, and all that. But I wanted to ask your opinion of, like, if this is something I can make work with Axon Framework, because what I've noticed is that in reducing the complexity, I really don't want custom-made unit tests. The actual data on these given when thens is enough. I actually don't want to run a DSL. I don't even want to press the buttons to say dot given, dot when, dot assert, or dot whatever expect on here. So check out that these are the events that are happening, and what it's doing. Well, what if I want more than one event for a given? They're cumulative. So this command here will make this event. This command here will have this as the given. And this command here will have both of these as the previous givens. So I can go row by row and accumulate all of that, right? So in other words, when I go to the test runner, which I shoved at the bottom of this whole implementation, the important thing that it's doing is that it's going slice by slice. But then when it looks at the timeline here, it's doing a reducer where the accumulator by default has a collection of events. And so at the end of running the proper test here, it's just pushing the next event onto the collection of events. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I don't know why you're not showing up in the picture here. I think I got you.
Is it?
There you go. No, so that was me. That was my fault. Okay, there we go. Okay, I fixed that. So does that kind of make sense? Because I am trying to take things away, and I've also made a couple of other assumptions in this implementation, at least in this implementation, because I'm pushing the envelope to say that I will never allow an event to, a command to give you more than one event. And that's for a reason, because I can put a processor in it to have one as a trigger, and then I can have a process create the second one if I need. Because I have ambiguity. Like, why do I have to choose which one gets... Because the storing event is a transactional action. Now, my opinion of which one goes first is implied business logic, or it's arbitrary, which neither are good if I'm not expressing that. So what that gives, though, is the test runner can be incredibly easy. And I used to have things that had the tests like this here. Let me show you a test.
Just a question to understand that. I think it's interesting because one of the nicest implementations of Axon that I've ever done in an actual project was an online platform to play bridge, card game.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
And we implemented all the rules. It's quite cool. It's one of those games where you can understand all the rules and still not be able to play.
Yeah, it's hard. Yes,
exactly me. And the interesting thing is, you could play that in a tournament setting, right? And if you think about, well, for those not familiar with the rule, you have 52 cards in a deck, and basically when the 52nd card is played, that's where you play cards in 4, and then that's called a trick. So you can win the trick, and because you've won the trick, you can also win the game. And because you've won the game, you can also win a round in a tournament, and because you've won the round in a tournament, you might also win the tournament. So essentially, from that one card played event, it's like the butterfly in
it triggers a lot,
effect, right?
Yeah,
it triggers a lot, and that is essentially one command triggering, in my example, for events, right? Maybe not in the same method, right? Well, probably not, but how would you model that? How would you describe that happening?
So I did another. Someone was calling me about a different game called Farkle, which is a dice game, and where you have to make a choice. And I think in games, there is a whole bunch of things that can either be implemented as a series of events that are handled by each individual processor, or it's a very complex read model, depending if there's no more interactions necessary. So I don't know the intricacies of bridge enough to really answer this properly, but I mean, I can use another example, I think, from this application where we have, in this unconference, we have the topic suggestions. You're familiar because you're in DDD and all this. You know what an unconference is and open spaces conference. So there's this point at which you've finished all the topic suggestions, or actually everyone can register and then everyone suggests topics, but then the topic suggestion is over and the organizers just make a schedule based on the voting of all participants. So this application has all of that. It's essentially doing that. And one of the interesting things is that when you have this conference registration closed, it's a triggering event to switch the mode of the application to now everyone has to go and vote, and that kind of thing. But I'm trying to really break things up into individual pieces as much as possible. And some of these things, as I'm trying to be as dumb and simple as possible in this implementation. And it's kind of, asked me questions like, okay, why am I doing this explicitly as a test? This is a function, right? It'll run. This is the original test runner that I had, and you have given, when, then. And in fact, in the implementation here, the original way that things run are these, given, when, then. But that's only done if there's a test defined on that particular step. What I've switched to is this, running the exception test runner. And the hypothesis is that I have everything I need to test here. You remember this is another thing that was keeping me back from the old agile TDD way of doing that, is like, you're testing too much. You're doing property-based testing. It's like, you know what? I don't care. That is correct. Because the resulting event is a proper capture of behavior and exactly what has to happen, I want to assert on every single value that's non-infrastructure, because it's all relevant. I need to know that something didn't change. It takes care of did this change or didn't change. So actually property by property testing is what I want in these given winners. That's the hypothesis. And so that means I no longer have to have a custom test with a common interface. I don't need a test at all in terms of testing event sourcing. What I need now is what we had in these ones that I already converted. I'm in the middle of rewriting this actually to do that. But for example, when I'm doing adding a time slot to when I'm the organizer of the event, I have my given, which is built up over here. So if I'm here, and I have an exception for time slots overlapping. Obviously, I can't put a time slot that overlaps with another time slot. That's not going to work for a schedule. That's my invariant here. So I have these previous events that have successfully happened, and they're part of my given. When I try to do this command here, my given are these events in the past. When I have my given, I have an exception. Time slot overlapping, right?
Yeah.
And I can, because I don't have a test name, I put in a purpose. That why, what does this tell me about that? Because that used to be the test name, which we used to have in unit testing. So I really just need a statement to say, what's going on at this point in time. I have to totally throw away implementation details of testing. Like that entire part, people say like you should do more, more of your code should be tests, or you should really focus on tests. Well, why the hell are we bloating that with opinions and code and translation between business and developer? Event sourcing gives us everything we need so we can throw away the entire testing side and still do tests.
So essentially, this is an example implementation of your event model flow.
Well, whether it's event modeled or not, event sourcing at the core is storing one more event to mark success.
Exactly.
So I don't care if you're using event modeling or not. Event modeling happens to have a nice format to show this, right? I'm at this point, in this row, my givens are the previous events that happened further down the timeline. And so my given when then speaks to me when I know this convention. And it's one convention I have to do. I mean, do I need to be subjected to crazy test setups every single time? No, I want that repeatability, right? I want to know that, hey, every time I'm just looking at the previous events, right? And that's it. The nice thing here is that I have, what is this slice for? Because in event modeling and our interpretation of event sourcing, a specific command is the slice, and that slice can have many incantations on the event model. Even if a different screen sends the same command, that is still the same slice, because you're talking about the
Yeah.
same what's it called, the same state transition, right? Regardless of where it's coming from. So that's why and this is why I'm pushing this to an array of these structures, and the test runner just iterates over that whole thing and interprets all these things and shoves it through how we think about testing, unit testing, and event source solutions. So that's kind of like what I wanted to see if I could fit this into Axon somehow, or make a similar kind of structure where I don't want to write tests by hand anymore. I want to get some JSON like this that explains the given when thens. And one of the other things I actually just to explain for people is that usually a given when then would be repeated history. Like I remember having building up sample histories for the givens, for the different givens, right? And I went to the point of this evolved from having an array of an event history, and then I would take a slice, first event, or then just the first two, or then just the first three, and then I would use those in the subsequent tests. And I'm like, why the hell am I doing this manually? Like, this is retarded. I gotta sorry for the word. Trump is affecting me now. But, anyway, it's really a waste of time, right? It's really bad to have this unnecessary subjectivity inserted where no subjectivity is required. It's just another source of confusion and explanation to people. Like, if I say, this is how the tests run, whatever you want to test, fit it in here. If you don't explain to me why you can't, it's probably a design issue. It's probably where you can't go here and explain to me how the application works. Why do you need extra complexity to go from here to here? And in the case of having multiple events from one command, this is a good example of how I would solve that. Is if I have this request unique ID to start a conference, needing to have a provided ID and this requested ID as two things, you just insert a processor, right? That's it. In this case, it's non-trivial, or at least I wanted it to be non-trivial to show automation here, but it could definitely be very, very anemic. I mean, especially if your to-do list is absolutely stupid and doesn't need to do any kind of extra processing. But anyway, some more on that convention is that, I can have one example timeline to show the buildup of the events and how they'll affect the read model. And I can insert multiple of those to that, but it's still doing the same accumulation. But then it resets to nothing when we finish this arrow. And I can also give an explanation here.
Yeah, so basically, there are more scenarios that are a little bit longer, right? Not just one.
Yeah, this is a smell though. If I'm putting more of these in, it generally probably means that I have like a whole blue arrow up here missing somewhere, right? If I'm going down to this level where I'm breaking this up, to me that's starting. I just wanted to show the mechanics of this. I would see this as a design smell in my solution, that I'm taking care of way too many large workflows. These arrows then should really be telling me that I have more blue arrows, and maybe I do, and maybe that's just another place for them to actually manifest. Is that if I have this processor appearing in two more of these blue arrows somewhere along the way, then that is a representation here, and I can obviously share the name in these labels, whereas I can be kind of descriptive here. And the interesting part about this is that I've fed this to AI as a picture. Like in Cursor AI, I take a screenshot of this, and it gave me, without hallucinating, both all the tests and the implementation, which run on first try. And not only that, it did it in the format that I showed you, the crazy custom format that I showed you. It had no learning at all about that format, obviously, anywhere else in its training data, yet it was still able to create it. So when we talked about at the beginning of the AI being kind of taking over, it is taking over if you're doing things properly. And we should be playing at this level as people that provide solutions to business. This is where we should be explaining what's going on, and we shouldn't be taking 4 hours of our day punching the keyboard and actually working and collaborating with people to solve the problems.
Yeah. exactly.
So I don't know if
Yeah.
that's kind of one of I know it's a little bit too much for us to actually do, but I kind of wanted your opinion on this crazy code base, because there's some other things here that we do. So for example, if we ever get to this page, we wrap this via HTTP, which if you fail at getting the events, it will go to the proper error page that it's an internal 500 error. Whereas if there is a business logic issue and you're failing in the actual command handler, that and you're not expecting it, you deal with that here. And so actually, where did I have here? So we have to feed the command handler and the command here, and then it wraps it at the proper stages. So where I have a problem getting events, that's a 500, and where I actually have a problem with the command handler, then I have a problem with an error here. And this can be obviously elaborated if you want to plug this back into your workflow to go somewhere else. But here we're just making it stupid. You just press back, fix your error, and press again, right? And that's it. So we're happy just to barf right away, and that's the simplest thing that could work. And then of course, if you again have a problem in storing the subsequent event, like you might have when you're getting the events, you also have a 500. So I didn't want this. This was repeating everywhere, obviously. So I just put it in the wrapper here. And we also do the same thing for the state view, where it's essentially you can't have a business logic error. I mean, it's just a projection, but you can still have an error that's internal to getting the events, or getting an error that where you're trying to persist one more. You're out of disk or whatever. This might be connectivity, or whatever it is. But it's internal 500, and it's basically handled by the fact that we have next. We're using whatever custom error page we made, so we're not getting the ugly white error page. Since I'm streaming, I don't want people to see. A lot of people are watching this at night, maybe in bed, and they don't want the white screen to wake up their partner that's sleeping next to them. So yeah, we've all done that.
You should always have dark mode on your error screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want your streams to be popular, you better have a dark mode. Anyway, so this follows, as I said, this follows this this way of moving through the event model bit by bit. And so I really don't want to be when I'm explaining the concepts, I don't want to be jumping around from page to page in the implementation. I just want to scroll down a little bit and show, okay, here's the rooms display, right? So then again, I'm using that method that I showed you up there to get the rooms, and if there's problems, it'll show the proper error. But here's my handlers for each type of event that I have, and again, it's always using a reducer. So there may be even more refinement here to kind of make this even simpler. But it's the key point about this whole thing is that it's forcing the way you implement an event source solution to be not as ad hoc, to start to you have enough control here to do whatever you want, but you're getting a really good cadence. And that actually is reflected in the estimates part, because if everyone's doing this the same way, you're getting really, really good numbers on how long it takes for these things to actually work.
Yeah.
And then, of course, after the implementation, we have the testing, which again is in this crazy new format. Where actually, this is a better example. This is how you do the give and then, which doesn't have the when because there's no command. So you have the expected state, right? And because there's no previous checkpoint, the default is this. And this event is actually the first one that gets used in the next one, because history is always what happened in the past. So it's always the previous rows. So this is the default, which is just an empty collection, which is fine. And then, of course, here we have this, and we can add this description at each point if we want to test something. If you, it can be sparse, so I can have just an event without purpose or state, and it'll just get skipped, but the event will get kept as the history. So I can. This one happens to be thorough to explain what happens at each point, but you certainly can have ones where, especially if the events are kind of not well, in this case, it's a bad example. If for a command handler, you might have some things that aren't the result of the same command as your previous events. So that's definitely where you have more of this sparseness, but in this you don't. So this is kind of like in a nutshell the whole thing. The room state view. This is the implementation for handling that page, and of course there's the template that we have for the HTML, which is render rooms. That's our rooms handlebar thing, which well, I have the other ones like topics or whatever, but that's it. So I really want the implementation to be, that's it. That's it for the business logic here, is really these things, and then the corresponding test to be just this thing here, which does all these things.
The only two things that I can imagine are, let's say, fundamentally quote unquote different in Axon compared to this as well, the test cases. So Axon is still is given when then, right? It's one step at a time, and you have to specify the previous step. And actually I have to think about my bridge days. A bridge game is 52 cards. That means to end the game you must play 52 times.
Yeah.
But there's also a bit of a bidding round in the beginning, and that can take much longer. There's no predefined. But that means to test the scenario where you're at the end of a game, you have to come up with a given scenario that makes sense with first the bidding, creating the game, having 4 players join, doing whatever bidding rounds need to be done, and then playing the 52 cards. Let me tell you, that's fun. Not.
Well, right? But I mean,
so you play every card exactly once, etc., etc. But if you could just do it in a scenario, you can test all these. What did you call them? Milestones or checkpoints?
Checkpoints, yeah. There's checkpoints, yeah. So you can say
checkpoints on the way. So now I just have to go through my 52 cards once, and on the way I can do all sorts of checkpoints.
That's right.
I'm trying to play a card the second time, which is impossible, right? A card is only in a deck once played, it's gone, at least in bridge. So you can add these checkpoints, and the way we solved that was actually with a utility method to create to name scenarios, and basically what they were was just returning lists for you. Right. And they would say this one is that scenario plus a few extra events, and this
it's scenarios.
So we found our way around it. I think this is more elegant. So this is one difference, and the other one is in your query or in your view, you have the rooms, and you say I do an ACP request.
This one
we would say you don't do an ACP request, so you receive an ACP request to get the rooms, but what we do is we send a query. Query again is a message.
No, I realize this. So I have to again have a disclaimer here that this is the working towards the simplest thing that could possibly ever work, which is really posts and gets, and there is no message passing. Like when I have my rooms state view, I'm always reducing the whole history. But the idea is that now you can logically start to layer in the caching as you say, okay, let's say that, every file retrieval takes 1 second to push the problem, right? And see that I can now limit it to, 2 file requests instead. And I can really work on the SLA of, because that's how event sourcing kind of evolved, and all the things about CQRS and all these things is really pushing the SLAs out of something extreme, like saying I need to know about every single event. Well, obviously, when you have 10 million events, that's not going to work, right? Or if I need to, make a new projection, a new report, and I have to go back 7 years to fix a bug, that's not going to work. So that's where we get to closing of the books and snapshots earlier on and all this kind of stuff. And the idea here is that yes, this will eventually evolve into something where it's instead of a history, you're getting a callback, a method that's passed in here, where you could have the infrastructure upon which you are working in be called upon as needed inside to do either filtering, or like we're doing with the dynamic consistency boundary, where those things can actually be injected here, where you have your opinion of what you want in terms of the history. So the history can already be sparse. I mean, who says that I can't filter on these three? So I'm only getting these three things, and I don't have to go through all of them and just switching out for these, right? So, all of these things get layered at the right approach. But the key is, my business logic, this will never ever change. It's always the same. So that's kind of like the reason. So that's why I don't have message passing here, because that's infrastructure. There's nothing there that's doing that. I should be able to put this into anything, right, and still have the same view. The other thing that's happening here is that there is no database, because it's all just, a new projection is just whatever the accumulators are creating in your reducers. And so everything is a reducer in this whole thing. I've even switched some things to be not just filters and matching on some. I've forced them all to be reduced. I just have the initial state, and everything is a reduction.
There's some Axon implementations that I know of that also said, we're starting the application without any relational or any database, right? There's just the event store and that's it. And when the application starts, it just builds the projection by going through the entire stream. Who cares? It's just a few 100,000 events.
Yeah.
It takes a second or two to load them. Who cares?
Yeah. I mean,
and it will solve the problem when we get there, and it allows teams to actually develop much faster. Because now every time you change your, especially in the beginning, your projections are going to change the whole time. Every time you find out, oh, there's more information that we need. Okay, great, just add it. Who cares? Restart and it's there. If you have a database, now you have to create you have to change your schema as well. So you can push a lot of decisions out, and people, including me, are still learning the number of decisions you can push forward. I'm always surprised by, oh, we don't need that now.
Yeah.
We can even add that later, right? And every time you discover something that you can push out.
Yeah, it's very humbling, and even like the experience with Yordis saying that, hey, Adam, you don't need to have upcasters. I'm like scratching my head. How I didn't even think about it. I just took it as given, and then like, you're right. That's less code.
The fun thing is, you don't need upcasters until you do.
Yeah.
And then you realize even when you do, you don't.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's a different story.
Yeah.
So the reason we are I'm actually very explicit about messages, and one thing, of course, it's supported by the framework, so it's already not something you have to care about. That's that I have to say that's one element, but another is I really like to have explicit classes, or at least definitions of code that match the exact definitions that I have in an event model.
Oh, exactly.
So if something is worth putting in an event model and my commands are there, my queries are essentially the information, because I always say that the value in a communication of the query is not the query, it's the response.
Yeah.
Right? The response carries the value of the communication. So that's the information that goes out, but you have to have something to trigger that information coming to you. And therefore we have those messages, and that gives you basically the start, and the rest is just as you identified here, is just, okay, I have a timeline with checkpoints, or in our case, given when then, a series of given when thens. Either can work. But and then the implementation, it just needs to, you can have AI generated for you. You can have a monkey type on the keyboard randomly until it, but when the test passes, it's good. You don't care. Right. It's
exactly. The other thing that I did here to cut things out was actually remove commands altogether, because I get and this actually is an interesting concept to kind of follow through on the dynamic context boundaries that we're exploring, is because I always have this matching, most of the time the command is exactly like the resulting event, unless you have to put in extra parameters onto the command for extra invariants that you're feeding. But I've had no problem dropping the idea of a command here. And I'm even not using classes for events or commands. So for example, in here, I don't know, this is in the wrong order. Okay, here's right. So the only reason I have a command as a parameter is so that I have a given when then for testing. That's the only reason. And so this is where you'll find this, but there is no defined place for the command. My command is just this anonymous object here. I don't have a class instance of the command whatsoever. This is enough. Like, this is enough to facilitate the state change that we need. So this is like the minimal thing that could possibly work. So again, I'm being dumb and stupid and simplistic on purpose to see what I can reduce this to. If I have two ways of doing something, can I do everything using one way instead? Right?
Yep.
Always just trying to push this as far as possible. So I'm curious to see with, like, if let's say I'm this dumb guy that comes to you with this solution. So now I want to plunk this into Axon, or start creating the next features in Axon and have the have the events shared between the two sides. How long is it going to take me to get rid of my my dumb event store, which is essentially this? That's the entire event store here. Yep. This is my Axon framework right there. That's all I need. How long is it going to take me to move that over and work with people on Axon? That's kind of the thing that I'm curious about. And like, as you kind of get new people using Axon, or people that have built a solution like this now, say, hey, my boss says this is a go, need to use Axon. How do I do it? That's the kind of thing I was hoping to. Obviously, we don't have enough time, so I'm hoping that we can do another session where maybe you, me, and Martin, because Martin's got more experience here. I'll be clumsily plunking along in the JV and making all sorts of mistakes. So maybe the three of us could kind of say, hey, here's an event model. Here's some stupid implementation that someone did, probably me. How do we move it to to something that makes sense that can go into production?
Purely hypothetical, right?
Purely, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in the end, the code is just one language, right? I mean, if you have a problem, you can describe it in English, you can describe it in Spanish, you can describe it in Chinese or Japanese.
Yeah.
And yes, some languages are a little bit more elegant with specific types of problems than others. Even in human languages, that's the case.
Yeah.
So you might need a few more words to describe something in one language compared to another. But I think essentially it should not, and it doesn't really matter, right? An event is an event, which is a data structure with typically a name to give the data structure a little bit of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, and deal with it. And I think that's what you meant with the command as well. You don't need a different class. And essentially, the data structure of the command in most cases is the same as the data structure of the event.
Yeah.
And strictly speaking, in Axon, you could create a single class that is both the command and just say, I want to apply this. And then it becomes an event. Because what distinguishes a command from an event in Axon is a wrapper class that in most cases you don't even care about.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just because you've said, hey, I want to apply this, you're saying, okay, what you're applying is the payload of an event. But that same payload could have been the payload of your command coming in.
Right.
In that case, you just have one message structure that you can use both as a command and as an event. So I think eventually you'll be able to achieve very much the same things. I do have to say that Axon 5 that we're working on, and we expect a milestone in April where the command handling side of things is available, and you'll be able to see the DCB, the dynamic consistency boundaries API as well. And it will be slightly different. There's less reliance than right now in Axon about the classes, right? Right now, the classes are pretty much central, which feels a little bit like class first. And it should be schema first, right? Instead. So we're focusing a little bit more on, okay, there's a data schema, and the way you want to represent that in your code could be completely different
Yeah.
as how it's represented in the communication channels between languages.
Yeah, I think that actually touches on something we talked about at the beginning about how we all started in event sourcing. There's definitely a lot of worry about having a proper shared event schema that we were focusing on because that was so important in the old ways of working. And now,
Yeah.
like as I was working with event modeling over the years, I'm like, you know what? I actually want the information first. The schema is secondary. Because once I know what information has to flow, then I can decide, okay, this is on int64, this is a varchar, whatever. This is a, I can get those answers later when I need, when I'm at the implementation, but I need to get the event flow, like the information flow, like what is this thing doing overall down first and understand it, and then to do that.
Right.
So I've definitely seen that in some of these event modeling frameworks that I've seen over the years. They also suffered from that. It's like, well, the developers really need a schema to see how this works. It's like, not really. We really want to see how the whole thing is tied together first before we make any of those decisions. So, even to the last thing, we had a non-auto thing where Sam Hattam was his framework for making event modeling was really centered about the schemas, and then reversed out of that and went information first and unlocked a lot. So yeah, it's interesting. And back to the Axon and this, I think because of the stupid implementation, we don't have any routing, like message routing from instances, etc. So the concept here is that where do you introduce the layer of wrapping what these method calls are into what eventually are needed as commands that have an envelope to understand where they're going to be delivered, if you're going to be having a fan out, whatever scaling approach you're using to handling load for your commands, right? But the point is that I think, as we mentioned earlier, is that we think of implementing at scale first. Like, well, this better work for a million things. So we start with infrastructure that has, and it leaks into our implementation. I have now a command class with a meta property that has routing information or whatever we use in terms of some distributed application patterns. We start to read books and dump all that in there. Meanwhile, we haven't delivered any value for showing how state changes occur in our application yet, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And on the other side, I also want so I want things to be as simple as possible as well, but also I want the framework in this case to elevate, let's say, the base level as much as we can. And that's what we're trying to do. And I always joke that we failed 4 times in Axon right now, because that's why we're building Axon 5. But hopefully every version was better than the one before.
Yeah.
We want to minimize the amount of work. So you just give your business logic and we'll figure out how, the things that we can figure out to make it scale. So the defaults. Axon 2 had very little defaults. Axon 3 already had a lot of things that's working out of the box, right? Just build your handler. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
nothing else, and it will work.
And with AI now, I see, if you're working with an event model, that you could, I mean, I'm at the point without writing any of my own custom software for it, that I'm pasting in the image of the given wendens or a whole slice, and it's filling in those blanks. And not only that, it actually knows that if I'm using Axon or not, that I just need to provide those state change pieces of code, and that's it. It's becoming quite amazing. So you said the Axon 5 is going to be out in April?
The first milestone. Yeah, first milestone release that has a couple of, especially the command side APIs ready, so people can play around with it, provide feedback while we're starting the next milestone, which will handle the events and projection side as well. Yeah. So
and
step
then
by step.
The open source versus the commercial aspect of AxonIQ, how it works, and when people are working on their home projects, their hackathons versus bringing it into production.
Yeah, so Axon framework is fully open source. There's no commercial catch to it. It is Apache 2 licensed. And then for the messaging and the event store, there's the Axon server part, which is commercially licensed, but there's a version that is free to use, which is a single. So you can download it and you can play around with it, and as long as you don't have a license file, it will just behave as a single node, and you can use basically all the important features for event sourcing and messaging. You can just use them. It is just that if you want to build a high available cluster, and we have support for regional routing, right? So you can have a multi-regional deployment of these nodes, and then applications can be connecting to nodes that are closer to them, so that the routing is optimized, all that multi-context, so you can separate the communication between different parts of your system and all of that. Tiered storage is also part of the paid plan. So if you have gazillions of events, you can store events on different disks. Hey, my recent events, you deserve to be on SSD. Older events, just go to this cheap spinning disk, please, or in the future S3 buckets as well. Those are part of the enterprise plan.
Yeah, that's great, because at that point, if you have that many events, you're probably making good money, enough to pay for it. So
exactly. And then I love working for free, but in the end, I also like to eat something.
yeah, we all have to eat. That won't change until we're replaced by our AI representations of ourselves.
if that AI cooks me a meal as well, I'm perfectly fine with it.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been pretty good. We have a question here from Yurdis. Maybe we can end up on a few questions from the people that are now have collected. We've a crowd has gathered as our discussion continued, and Yurdis says, I have been struggling with having a proto buffers in my domain code or not. Are you okay? I've been struggling with having in my domain code. What are you finding there? Primarily because of the amount of work mapping is so high. If I keep them both separate, so I think I've encountered this protobuf thing before, in terms of I think it's getting into the schema, keeping a schema of the events and messages and all that, so that we can communicate globally and not worry about versions of messages and things like that. What advice would you give to someone that's sitting with protobufs with this problem?
So protobuf on a communication level, right, on the data that goes across the wire is beautiful. It's pretty smart. It just has just enough schema for the recipient of the message to make sense of what the ones and zeros mean, even if you don't understand the entire schema. So if there are some elements in there that you don't understand, you can just safely ignore them. You'll know how many bytes to ignore and move on. Protobuf on the code side, on how, well, I know it in Java and I've seen it in some other languages, is, for lack of a better word, horrible. Abominable. Because in Java it uses a builder pattern, and you have to create a builder and then do every property as a method call and then do build, and if you forget one, you're completely screwed, and if you have nested, it's worse. And then if you have data structures that you say, well, this data structure in this message is exactly the same as there, you cannot really copy it, because in binary formats they're the same, but in code format they're completely different, and they're not interchangeable anymore. So I feel the pain, and I think I tend to default to JSON for communication. And yes, JSON has a lot more schema in the message, and it's a big waste of bytes, but it's the tools that we have are just more friendly to work with, and it's a really lame excuse, because we should improve the tools instead of avoiding the problem. But that's usually what I do. So I avoid protobuf as my message definition, although I like it on a wire level.
Right, right.
I
Yeah.
hope that answer is
So
completely useless for you, Jordis.
yeah, Yordis says I'm using JSON format, but with protobuf for dealing with schema registry and breaking change detections and so on. So that
Okay.
was a question, a follow up to the question. So yeah, I think it's getting towards 10 p.m. your time.
11 actually.
11.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I get the daytime savings and daylight savings time here and all that. I forget. So thank you for staying this long. I don't see any other questions. So leave it at that. And then obviously this is a recording that's going to be available on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and Twitch. So if you if you're listening to this now and you missed the initial part, this will be on all those channels for you to listen from the front. And then feel free to drop comments and ask us any other questions you might have, and we'll address them in those posts. Of course, feel free to join the Discord community for event modeling. That's where I am, and Allard's there too from time to time. So you can always ping him if we have something that's event modeling related and event sourcing related. That's probably a good place for that. But otherwise, I'm looking forward to a follow-up on this because I didn't get as far as I thought we wanted to. I knew there's going to be a lot of discussions. There's never enough time. So again, you've been very generous to stay on this long and discuss everything. I'd like to, in the future, if you have time, to go through maybe with me and maybe even Martin so that he can hold my hand through the JVM, to do the next steps for some of these applications that we're working on in the community as examples to show people really what that transition's like. I think they'd appreciate it. So if you're open to that, we can schedule another time, and then the community people that are listening, let us know in the comments if that's what you want to see. Hopefully we'll get that going, and then maybe do another one for the launch of Axon 5 and really show in action, dynamic context boundaries, consistency boundaries. Yeah. Acronym stuff, man. DCB. I don't know what the C stands for now.
Exactly.
So
we just needed one more acronym. So we have DDD, CQRS, ES, and DCB.
Yeah.
Great. Let's.
I'm sure there'll be more. Yeah. I mean, one of those things. The reason that we have this acronym now, obviously, is to tell people that there's a different approach than what you read about when you go on Google and search for event sourcing. You're going to run into aggregates and streams per entity, and so now we have this necessity to call out another way of working, and we have to give it a name, obviously. So we're here now. Hopefully, in a few years, we're going to drop that as well, because this is going to be the default. So, and on it goes, and we'll have another thing to deal with.
Exactly. Just slice stuff off one by one until event sourcing is really the simplest thing that could ever exist, and solve all the problems that we have. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So yeah, let's coordinate. Let's see what the people have to say and what they want to know. Happy to do that at any point. And again, thank you again so much for taking the time in your evening between Europe and the west coast of Canada. It's always a tough one to find, but we did it, and I appreciate you staying up. And have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, and let's talk soon.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Fantastic.